The air in the crematorium was thick and cloying, a heavy blanket woven from lilies and loss. Liam stood beside the simple wooden casket, a ghost in his own life. The polished wood reflected a distorted version of his face, a man hollowed out by grief. His father, a man of quiet hands and softer words, was gone. The world felt muted, its colours bled away, leaving only shades of grey. He felt a sharp, impatient tug on his arm. It was Clara, his wife. Her face, usually a mask of carefully applied perfection, was pinched with irritation. Her eyes, the colour of cold diamonds, were not on the casket or on her grieving husband. They were scanning the sparse crowd, judging, calculating. "Is this it?" she whispered, her voice a cruel hiss that cut through the sombre quiet. "Is this everyone? I don't see anyone of consequence." Liam flinched, the words striking him like a physical blow. He didn't answer. What could he say? His father was a watchmaker. His friends were other craftsmen, neighbours, the librarian he shared books with. They were people of consequence to his father, and to him. To Clara they were invisible, spectres from a world of manual labour and modest means she desperately wanted to leave behind. Her mother Margaret drifted over, a galleon in full sail, draped in black silk that looked more expensive than Liam's car. She gave Liam a look of profound disappointment, a look he had become intimately familiar with over the past decade. "A truly pathetic turnout, Liam," Margaret declared, her voice carrying just enough for the surrounding mourners to hear. "It's a reflection, you know. A man's funeral is the final summary of his life's importance." She patted his arm with a condescending pity that felt worse than any insult. Liam's jaw tightened. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them that his father's importance wasn't measured in the number of suits in a room, but in the intricate dance of gears he could set into motion, in the quiet wisdom he offered over a cup of tea, in the unwavering love he had for his son. But the words caught in his throat, choked by a grief too vast and a weariness too deep. Clara's brother David swaggered over, reeking of expensive cologne and entitlement. He clapped Liam on the shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look like comfort, but felt like a claim of ownership. "Tough break, old man," he said, his eyes already flicking toward the exit. "Look, we'll get through this formality, and then we can talk business. I've got big things on the horizon, big things." The service was a blur, a few heartfelt words from a friend, a simple eulogy from Liam that he could barely get through. Through it all, he felt the burning impatience of his wife and her family. They fidgeted, they checked their phones. They were not mourning a man, they were enduring an inconvenience. Afterward, they gathered at his father's small house, a place filled with the scent of oil, old wood, and a lifetime of memories. For Liam, every corner held a ghost. For Clara and her family, it was a confirmation of their worst fears. "My God, it's even smaller than I remembered," Clara muttered, running a finger over a dusty bookshelf and inspecting it with disgust. "How did he live like this? It's practically a hovel." Margaret circled the living room like a vulture. "We'll have to have everything fumigated before we can even think about putting it on the market. The land might be worth something, I suppose, if we can get the zoning changed. We'll have to tear this shack down immediately." Liam felt a cold rage begin to build in the pit of his stomach. This was his home. This was his father's legacy, and they were talking about it like it was a pile of refuse to be cleared away. Standing quietly in the corner was Mr. Thompson, his father's lawyer. He was a man cut from the same cloth as Liam's father, old world, dignified, his suit immaculate, but not flashy. He held a worn leather briefcase, its brass latches gleaming softly. He had been a silent observer through the whole sordid affair, his face an unreadable mask. Clara's eyes locked onto him. She saw not a man, but an answer to the only question that mattered to her. She strode across the room, her heels clicking aggressively on the old floorboards, a sound that creaked like an old church door. She stopped directly in front of the lawyer, ignoring Liam completely. The few remaining friends of his father fell silent, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The air grew tense, electric. "All right, let's cut to the chase," Clara announced, her voice loud and brassy, shattering the fragile peace. "We've all sat through this dreary affair. We've paid our respects. Now the important part." She gestured around the small, cluttered room with a sweep of her hand. "Obviously there isn't much, but my husband is the only family, so just give us the number." Mr. Thompson raised a silver eyebrow. "The number, Mrs. Devereux?" "Yes, the number," Clara snapped, her patience gone. She looked at Liam, then back at the lawyer, a cruel smirk playing on her lips. How much? What did the old man actually have socked away? A few thousand? Enough to cover the funeral costs, I hope? Just tell us what we're working with so we can be done with this. The public humiliation was complete. She had asked the question like she was inquiring about the price of groceries. Reducing his father's entire existence to a dollar amount she already assumed was laughable. Liam felt his face burn with shame. He saw the pity in the eyes of his father's friends. He saw the smug satisfaction on Margaret's and David's faces. Mr. Thompson's expression did not change. He looked from Clara's demanding face to Liam's shattered one. He adjusted his glasses, a slow, deliberate movement. "The estate is complex," the lawyer said, his voice calm and even. "It is not a matter of a simple number I can provide you with here and now." David scoffed. "Complex? What's complex about a tiny house and a failing watch shop? Just give us the bottom line, man. We have plans." Mr. Thompson's gaze became steel. "Be that as it may, a formal reading of the will is required. It will take place at my office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Punctuality would be appreciated." He then turned his full attention to Liam, his eyes softening for the first time. "Liam, it is imperative that you are there." The finality in his tone silenced even Clara. She looked from the lawyer's stoic face to her husband's, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. It was not the answer she expected. It was not the simple, dismissive transaction she had anticipated. For a fleeting moment, a seed of uncertainty was planted, but it was quickly choked out by her own arrogance. She tossed her head back, laughing a short, sharp laugh. "Fine," she said. "A formal reading. How dramatic. We'll be there. Don't expect it to take long." She grabbed Liam's arm again, her grip like a vice. "Come on, Liam. Let's get out of this depressing place. I need a drink." As she dragged him away, Liam looked back at Mr. Thompson. The lawyer gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture that held a world of meaning, a promise of something hidden, a secret waiting in the wings. In the suffocating darkness of his grief, it was the first tiny spark of light. The decade of his marriage to Clara had been a slow, grinding erosion of his soul. He had met her at a university fundraiser, a world away from his own. He was there helping to set up the audio equipment, a side job to help his father. She was the daughter of a donor gliding through the room in a halo of privilege and perfume. She had seemed dazzling, like a star that had fallen to earth. He had been naive. He mistook her interest for genuine affection. He was handsome in a rugged, unassuming way, and she, in a moment of what he later realized was probably boredom, had found him novel. A project. A piece of rough clay she could mold into something that fit her world. Their courtship was a whirlwind conducted on her terms. He was introduced to her family, who inspected him like a piece of livestock. Margaret had sized him up immediately, her eyes scanning his simple clothes, her smile thin and brittle. "A technician?" she had asked, the word dripping with disdain. "How practical?" David had been more direct. "So what's your dad do?" he'd asked over a dinner at a restaurant where the water cost more than Liam's lunch. When Liam replied, "He's a watchmaker," David had actually laughed. "A watchmaker? Seriously? I didn't know they still made those." Liam had loved Clara, or at least the idea of her he had constructed in his mind. He thought he could bridge the gap between their worlds with love and hard work. He was wrong. The gap was a chasm, and they were always on the opposite sides. After they married, the project began in earnest. Clara and her mother launched a relentless campaign to fix Liam. His job as a skilled mechanic at a reputable garage was a source of constant shame for them. "Your hands are always so dirty, Liam," Clara would complain, recoiling as if he were contaminated. "My friends' husbands are bankers, lawyers. What am I supposed to say you do? You fix cars." "I'm one of the best diagnostic mechanics in the city, Clara," he'd tried to explain once, pride in his voice. "People come to me when no one else can figure out the problem." "Oh, wonderful," Margaret had chimed in, overhearing. "So you're the king of the grease monkeys." What an accomplishment. They pushed him to go into business with David. David was a small-time real estate developer with champagne tastes and a beer budget. His business model was built on risky loans and flashy marketing, a house of cards that always seemed one breath away from collapse. "David needs a partner he can trust," Clara insisted, night after night. "You're good with your hands. You could oversee the construction sites. You'd finally be an executive, an owner." "I don't know anything about construction, Clara," Liam argued. "And I don't trust David's numbers. They don't add up." This was the wrong thing to say. It was an insult to the family's imagined business acumen. "You don't trust my brother?" she'd shrieked. "You, who works in a filthy garage, dare to question my brother's success? He's building an empire, and you're changing oil filters." His father, Arthur, had been his only refuge. Every Sunday, Liam would escape to the quiet sanctuary of his father's watch shop. The tiny space, smelling of brass and cleaning solutions, was a world of precision and patience. Arthur Devereux was a man who understood that true value was not in size or volume, but in quality and integrity. "She's a difficult woman, your wife," Arthur said once, his eyes focused through a jeweler's loupe as he nudged a microscopic gear into place. He never spoke ill of Clara, but he saw the toll the marriage was taking on his son. "They think I'm not good enough, Dad," Liam confessed, the words heavy with shame. "They think you're not good enough." Arthur set down his tweezers and looked at his son. His eyes were clear and kind. "What they think, Liam, is a reflection of them, not of you. Remember that. Empty barrels make the most noise. Their world is all about the shiny exterior. They don't have the patience to understand what makes things tick." Now, driving home from the funeral, Clara's voice was a drill in his ear. "I cannot believe the state of that house. We have to call a realtor tomorrow. David knows a guy who can flip it fast. We'll need whatever cash we can get from it for David's new project." The new project was David's latest gamble, a luxury condominium development on a piece of land he'd acquired with yet another high-interest loan. He called it the Pinnacle, and he spoke of it as if it were the next wonder of the world. In reality, he was financially overextended and desperately needed a new infusion of cash to keep it from going under before the first foundation was even poured. "They're expecting a significant capital investment from us," Clara continued, as if Liam had any say in the matter. Whatever your father left, plus the sale of the house and that dusty old shop. It's probably not much, but it'll be our buy-in.
It's the least you can do to secure our family's future after all we've done for you. Liam gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. All they had done for him was to systematically dismantle his self-worth. They had isolated him, belittled him, and treated him as a stepping stone. And now they were planning to cannibalize his father's memory to fund their next precarious venture. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay in the cold, sterile bedroom of the house Clara had insisted they buy, a house that felt more like a showroom than a home. He thought of his father's quiet dignity. He thought of the condescending pity on Margaret's face. And he thought of Clara's cruel, public question. How much? The next morning, as he put on his only good suit, the one his father had helped him pick out years ago, Clara, Margaret, and David were already waiting in the living room, buzzing with a greedy energy. "Liam, hurry up," Clara called. "Let's go get our money." Liam looked at his reflection in the mirror. He saw the same tired eyes, the same weary face. But underneath, something had shifted. The cold rage from the day before had not dissipated. It had cooled, hardened, and settled deep within him. It was a quiet, patient anger, the kind that waits. As he walked down the stairs, Mr. Thompson's words echoed in his mind. "It is imperative that you are there." He had a feeling this was not about the pittance Clara expected. It was about something else entirely. For the first time in a very long time, he felt a flicker of something other than resignation. He felt curiosity. The law offices of Thompson, Crestwell and Finch were located on the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper downtown. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass. A hushed reverence permeated the air, the kind of quiet that costs a fortune to maintain. David looked around, impressed. "All right, the old guy had a decent lawyer. I'll give him that. Maybe he had a better insurance policy than we thought." They were led into a large boardroom with a polished mahogany table that reflected the city skyline like a dark mirror. Mr. Thompson was already seated at the head of the table, the same worn leather briefcase resting beside him. "Please have a seat," he said, his tone formal and uninviting. Clara, Margaret, and David sat on one side, a united front of avarice. Liam sat on the other, alone. The distance between them across the vast table felt symbolic. Mr. Thompson opened the briefcase with a pair of satisfying clicks. He removed a single thick envelope sealed with wax. "As you know, we are here for the reading of the last will and testament of Arthur Devereux." Clara leaned forward, her eyes fixed on the envelope. "Just get on with it," she said. The lawyer ignored her. He broke the seal and began to read. The legal language was dense, full of clauses and sub-clauses. He read through the standard bequests first, a collection of rare watchmaking tools to a museum, a donation to the local library. Margaret sighed impatiently. "And now," Mr. Thompson said, his voice lowering slightly, "we come to the primary estate." He paused and looked directly at Liam. "Before I proceed, I must provide some necessary context. What I am about to disclose is protected by decades of non-disclosure agreements and legal structures which have now expired upon my client's death." A new level of attention settled over the room. Even David stopped looking at his phone. "Your father, Liam," the lawyer began, "was, as you know, a watchmaker. He was, in fact, one of the finest horologists of his generation. But this was not his profession, it was his passion and his cover." Liam stared at him, confused. "Cover? What are you talking about?" "Arthur Devereux, the humble watchmaker, did not exist in the financial world, but another man did, a man known only by a pseudonym, a ghost in the market. He was an investor, a prodigy,
who began with a small inherited stake in the 1970s and grew it with a genius that was nothing short of legendary. Mr. Thompson slid a document across the table to Liam. It was a summary of holdings. The numbers were so long they seemed unreal. "Your father's pseudonym in the financial world," the lawyer said, his voice resonating in the silent room, "was the horologist. He chose it because he saw the market as a complex machine. He understood how all the pieces fit together. While the world was chasing trends, he was investing in the fundamental gears of the global economy: infrastructure, technology, and most importantly, finance." Clara let out a choked, disbelieving laugh. "Is this a joke? The old man was some kind of secret agent of finance? Please, he couldn't even afford to fix the peeling paint on his own house." "The peeling paint was a choice, Mrs. Devereux," Thompson replied, his voice like ice. "Your father-in-law valued anonymity above all else. He despised the culture of ostentatious wealth. He lived modestly because he wanted to, not because he had to." He then turned back to Liam. "The horologist built an empire, a vast, intricate network of holding companies, trusts, and assets, all managed through this office. He was the sole owner of the Aurelian global conglomerate." David, who fancied himself a player in the world of finance, suddenly sat bolt upright. His face went pale. "Aurelian Global? That's impossible. Aurelian is a monster. They own everything. Banks, tech firms, huge tracts of commercial real estate. They're one of the biggest private equity firms in the world. No one knows who owns them." "That is correct," Mr. Thompson said with a thin smile. "No one did. Until now, Arthur was the sole shareholder, and per his last will and testament, which I am now executing, he leaves his entire estate, including 100% of his controlling interest in Aurelian Global and all its subsidiaries, to his only son." He looked directly at Liam, his expression grave. "Congratulations, Liam. You are now the sole owner. The total value of the estate, after a conservative accounting this morning, is estimated to be approximately $91 billion. Silence. A profound, deafening silence filled the room. The city noise outside seemed to vanish. Liam felt the air leave his lungs. $91 billion. The number was meaningless. It was a sound, a collection of syllables that his brain could not process. He felt dizzy, unmoored from reality. Then came the sound. A strangled gasp from across the table. It was Clara. Her face had gone from smug disbelief to a mask of utter, slack-jawed shock. Her perfectly painted lips were parted, her eyes wide and blank. "No," she whispered. "No, that's a lie. It's a trick." Margaret was frozen, her hand clutching her pearls, her face a ghastly shade of white. David looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He was shaking his head slowly, muttering, "No, no, no." And then Mr. Thompson delivered the final, devastating blow. He slid another folder across the table. "There is one more piece of business," he said, his voice dispassionate. "It concerns one of Aurelian's many subsidiary financial groups, a firm by the name of Pinnacle Capital Investments." David's head snapped up. "Pinnacle Capital? That's my lender. They hold the note on my new development." "They do indeed," Thompson confirmed. "Aurelian Global is the parent company of Pinnacle Capital. As of this morning, your new boss and the man who holds the debt that is financing your entire operation is your brother-in-law." The room tilted. The walls seemed to warp. The foundation of their world, built on the arrogant assumption of Liam's worthlessness, had not just cracked, it had been vaporized. Their wealth, their status, their future, it was all, ironically, dependent on the man they had spent a decade trying to destroy. Clara's eyes darted from the lawyer to Liam, then back again. The shock on her face was curdling into something else, a frantic, desperate calculation. He could see the gears turning in her head, the frantic attempt to reframe the last 10 years, but then her mind seemed to land on the funeral, on her own words echoing in the silent, opulent room. "How much?" "Just give us the number. Enough to cover the funeral costs, I hope." The full, crushing weight of her colossal miscalculation landed on her all at once. The arrogance, the cruelty, the public humiliation she had inflicted on the man who was secretly one of the wealthiest people on the planet. Her breath hitched, her eyes rolled back in her head. With a soft, pathetic groan, Clara's body went limp, and she slid from her chair onto the plush carpet, collapsing in a dead faint. Margaret shrieked, a high, piercing sound of pure panic. David just sat there, staring at Liam, his face a canvas of horror and disbelief. Liam didn't move. He looked down at his wife's unconscious form on the floor, then at the terrified faces of her family. He felt nothing. No pity, no alarm. The grief for his father was still there, a vast, quiet ocean. But the rage he had felt was gone, replaced by an unnerving, absolute calm. He looked at Mr. Thompson, who was watching him, waiting. In that moment, Liam understood the last gift his father had given him. It wasn't the money. It was the power to right a decade of wrongs, the power to restore a balance that had been so cruelly tilted. He took a slow, deep breath. The decision was not even a conscious thought. It was an instinct, a certainty that rose from the deepest part of his being. The years of being the patient victim were over. The time of the sleeping giant had come to an end. He was awake now. "Mr. Thompson," Liam said, his voice steady and clear, a voice no one in that room had ever heard him use before. "Help me understand the details of David's loans." The world outside the boardroom window continued on, oblivious. But inside, a new world had just begun. The days that followed were a blur of comprehension. Liam spent hours with Mr. Thompson and his team of accountants and legal experts. They walked him through the labyrinthine empire his father had built. It was a monument to one man's quiet genius, a complex machine of trusts, holding companies and assets spread across the globe. It was designed for one purpose, to grow silently, invisibly, while its owner lived a life of simple peace. Liam learned that his father had started with a small inheritance from his own father, a man who had made a modest fortune in early electronics. Arthur, seeing the hollow bravado of the financial world, had decided to play the game on his own terms. He became the horologist, a name whispered with awe on trading floors by people who had no idea they were talking about a man who fixed cuckoo clocks in a dusty shop. The more Liam learned, the more he understood his father. The humility wasn't an act, it was a philosophy. He had seen wealth corrupt people, turn them into caricatures like Clara and her family, and he had wanted no part of it. He had built a fortress of fortune to protect his son not with luxury, but from the very poison of it. Clara had recovered from her faint, but not from the shock. She and her family had been escorted out of the law office, dazed and silent. When Liam returned home that evening, the atmosphere was thick with a cloying, desperate sweetness he had never experienced before. Clara met him at the door, her face arranged in a look of loving concern. "Liam, darling," she cooed, taking his coat. "You must be exhausted. I've had chef-prepared meals delivered. Your favorite." She had never known his favorite meal. Margaret and David were there too, sitting stiffly on the sofa. Margaret stood and rushed to him, her hands fluttering. "Liam, we are just overwhelmed. Your father, what a man. So discreet, so brilliant. We always knew there was something special about your bloodline." David, for the first time in his life, looked at Liam with something approaching respect, though it was tainted with a thick layer of fear. "Liam, buddy," he started, his voice strained. "About this whole Pinnacle Capital thing, it's a misunderstanding, right? I mean, we're family. You wouldn't, you know." Liam looked at the three of them, their faces masks of feigned sincerity. The years of insults, the condescension, the casual cruelty, they thought it could all be wiped away with a plate of catered lasagna and a few false compliments. They didn't see him. They saw a walking, talking vault of money they had almost lost the key to. The memory of the funeral returned to him, sharp and clear, Clara's voice, cutting and cruel. How much? The smug looks on their faces, the shame he felt. He had a choice. He could forgive them. He could absorb them into his new world, fund David's failing project, and continue the charade. They would be sickeningly devoted to him as long as the money flowed. He could have the life they had always claimed they wanted for him. Or he could do something else. He looked at Clara, who was now trying to give him a shoulder massage, her touch hesitant and strange. "I'm tired," he said, shrugging her hands off. "I have another meeting early tomorrow." He walked past them and went upstairs, leaving them in a state of anxious confusion. The next morning he was back in the boardroom with Mr. Thompson. The table was covered in documents related to David's company, D Corp Development. "As we suspected, Liam," Thompson said, pointing to a highlighted column of figures. "David's accounting is creative. He's been misrepresenting his assets to secure secondary loans. He's leveraged the Pinnacle loan to a dangerous degree. Frankly, it's textbook fraud." Liam stared at the numbers. He saw the web of lies and arrogance that David had spun. He thought about the pressure, the constant demands for him to invest in this sham. They hadn't just wanted his money, they had wanted to make him complicit in their corruption. "They think I'm going to bail them out," Liam said quietly. "They think this is their winning lottery ticket." "What do you want to do, Liam?" Thompson asked. The question was simple, but the weight behind it was immense. Liam looked out the window at the city below. He saw thousands of people going about their lives, working, striving, living. People like his father, people like the man he used to be. Then he thought of Clara, Margaret, and David, who believed the rules of work and consequence didn't apply to them. He turned back to the lawyer. The decision had been made the moment Clara collapsed on the floor. Everything since had just been gathering the tools. "They built their world on a fantasy of their own superiority," Liam said, his voice cold and precise. "A fantasy paid for with my father's money, though they never knew it. I'm not going to bail them out, Mr. Thompson. I'm going to present them with the bill." He picked up a pen. "Let's begin. I want to recall the loan to D Corp Development, all of it, effective immediately. And I want to initiate a full, independent forensic audit of their books." Thompson's face broke into a rare, grim smile. "I will make the calls." "There's more," Liam said. "I've been looking through the asset summaries. Aurelian owns significant shares in 2 of the other banks David has borrowed from. I want to transfer those debts to our direct control, and any personal lines of credit Margaret and Clara have. I want to know who holds them." "Consider it done," the lawyer replied. "We will acquire their debt. We will own all of it." The plan was surgical. It was elegant. It wasn't a loud, angry revenge. It was a quiet, systematic dismantling. He would use the very systems of finance and law they worshipped to bring their world down around them. He would not be a barbarian sacking Rome. He would be the accountant calling in the city's debts. The first domino fell 2 days later. Liam was at home, sitting in the living room and pretending to read a book, when David burst through the door. His face was blotchy and panicked. "It's a disaster," he yelled, waving a letter in his hand. "Pinnacle Capital recalled the loan, all of it. They want $80 million in 10 business days. And they've frozen all further disbursements. Clara and Margaret rushed to his side. What? That's impossible, Margaret cried. They can't do that. And they're launching an audit, David wailed, his voice cracking. A forensic audit. They're sending in sharks, Mum. They'll find everything. Clara turned to Liam, her eyes wild with panic. Liam, you have to fix this. Call them. You own the company. Tell them to stop. Liam looked up from his book, feigning confusion. I own it? Clara, I wouldn't even know who to call. It's a massive company. I'm still just trying to understand it all. He infused his voice with the same gentle helplessness he had used for 10 years. It was a role he knew how to play perfectly. What do you mean you don't know who to call? She shrieked, her voice returning to its familiar, shrewish pitch. You're worth $90 billion. Act like it. You're so useless. The irony was exquisite. She was screaming at him for being useless, while he was the one silently orchestrating her entire world's collapse. He just nodded slowly, a look of concerned sympathy on his face. I'll see what I can do, Clara. I'll talk to Mr. Thompson in the morning. Of course, he did no such thing. The next day, the second domino fell. David's secondary lenders, now under Liam's indirect control, sent their own notices, citing the instability caused by the Pinnacle recall. They were freezing his lines of credit. The cascade had begun. Panic turned to frantic desperation. David spent his days on the phone, calling old contacts, trying to secure new financing, but word travels fast in the world of high-risk real estate. The doors that were once open were now slammed shut in his face. No one would touch him. A week later, Liam was with Clara at a charity gala she had insisted they attend. It was her desperate attempt to maintain the facade of their status. As they sat at their table, a waiter approached their friend, a banking executive named Marcus. After a brief whispered conversation, Marcus and his wife stood up, made a flimsy excuse, and left. A few minutes later, another couple did the same. Soon, they were sitting alone at a table for 10. Clara's face was pale. "What is happening?" she whispered. "Why is everyone leaving?" The truth was, Liam, through Aurelian, had quietly bought the debt of several people in their social circle who were over-leveraged. A few discreet calls from Mr. Thompson's office had made it clear that being associated with the Devereux family was now a liability. Their social standing, built on air and arrogance, was evaporating before their eyes. The evening's humiliation was capped at the valet. When David, who had met them there, handed the attendant his ticket, the young man returned with a clipboard. "I'm sorry, Mr. Devereux, but the vehicle has been repossessed." David stared at him, dumbfounded. "What? My Maserati? Don't be ridiculous." "The finance company sent the tow truck an hour ago, sir," the valet said, refusing to make eye contact. "Your account is in default." It was the first tangible piece of their world to be physically ripped away. Margaret made a scene, screaming at the poor valet while Clara tried to pull her away, her face burning with shame. Liam watched it all, a silent observer. He felt a cold, clean satisfaction. It was like watching a complex watch that he had assembled himself, each gear turning precisely, each lever tripping the next in a perfect, inevitable sequence. The hits kept coming. The American Express Centurion card, Margaret's ultimate status symbol, was declined when she tried to buy a hideously expensive handbag. The country club suspended their membership for non-payment of dues. Notices began appearing on the door of their ostentatious mansion, foreclosure warnings, legal summons. Through it all, Liam played his part. He was the concerned, in-over-his-head husband. He would listen to their frantic, tearful tirades and nod sympathetically. "I'm trying, Clara," he would say. "It's just so complicated. These things take time." His passivity drove them insane. They veered between begging him to use his power and screaming at him for his incompetence. They never once suspected that his incompetence was a weapon and that it was aimed directly at their hearts. The final act was approaching. David's company was in ruins. The audit had uncovered years of fraud, and the district attorney's office was now involved. Their house was days away from being seized by the bank, a bank that Liam now owned. The confrontation, when it came, was not in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was in the garish, gold-leafed living room of their crumbling palace. Bailiffs were moving through the house, placing yellow seizure tags on furniture, on paintings, on the grand piano David had never learned to play. It was a scene of total, abject ruin. Clara, Margaret, and David stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by the evidence of their downfall. Their faces were hollowed out by sleepless nights and sheer terror. When Liam walked in, their desperation finally found its target. "You!" Margaret shrieked, her voice a raw, ragged thing. She pointed a trembling finger at him. "This is your fault. You brought this curse upon us. Ever since you married my daughter, it's been one disaster after another. You are a plague of bad luck." David, his face puffy and unshaven, took a step toward him. "She's right."
This all started when you came into the picture. My business was fine. Our lives were fine. You and your pathetic poor man's energy have poisoned everything. Clara, her hair a mess, her designer dress wrinkled, looked at him with eyes full of a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. My mother is right. You are useless. You have $90 billion and you can't do a single thing to stop this. You just stand there watching. What good are you? What good have you ever been? They had finally said it. The words they had been thinking for 10 years. That he was the source of all their problems, that his inherent worthlessness was a contagion. Liam stood there and let them finish. He listened to the litany of insults, the pathetic, desperate attempt to shift the blame. The old Liam would have flinched. He would have absorbed the blows and retreated into himself. But the old Liam was gone. When they finally ran out of breath, a heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of a bailiff tagging a porcelain statue. Liam took a slow, deliberate step forward. He looked at each of them, his gaze steady and unforgiving. The quiet, helpless man they knew was gone, replaced by someone they didn't recognize at all, someone powerful. "Useless," he said, the word soft but carrying an immense weight. "A curse. Is that what I am?" He let the question hang in the air. Then he began to speak, his voice calm, measured, and utterly devastating. "For 10 years I have listened to you. I listened when you called my job a disgrace. I listened when you called my father's house a hovel. I listened when you called me worthless, a grease monkey, a man who wasn't good enough for your family." He took another step. "I listened as you planned to sell my father's home before he was even cold. I listened as you plotted to use his memory as a buy-in for your brother's fraudulent company." His eyes locked on Clara. "And I listened to you, Clara. At my father's funeral, in front of his friends, his memory, you stood up and you asked, 'How much?' You didn't ask because you were curious. You asked because you wanted to prove, once and for all, how little he was worth, how little I was worth." Tears of self-pity began to well in Clara's eyes. I was upset." "No," Liam cut her off, his voice like a blade. "You were arrogant, you were cruel, and you were wrong." He smiled, but it was a cold, terrible thing. "You asked how much my father was worth.
The answer was $91 billion, but you didn't just get the math wrong. You got everything wrong. He turned to David. You thought Pinnacle Capital was just some faceless lender. You thought you could lie and cheat your way to the top. What you didn't know was that Pinnacle Capital was owned by a company called Aurelian Global, and Aurelian Global was owned by my father. David's jaw dropped. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the picture it formed was a nightmare. It wasn't bad luck that recalled your loan, David, Liam continued, his voice relentless. It was me. It wasn't a market downturn that froze your credit. It was me. It wasn't some anonymous corporate shark that launched the audit that will now send you to prison for fraud. It was me. He looked at Margaret, who was clutching her chest, hyperventilating. Those credit cards that were declined, the club membership that was revoked, the friends who suddenly wouldn't take your calls, that was me too. I bought your debt, Margaret. I own every last pathetic piece of this sham life you built. Finally, he turned back to Clara. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. The truth was dawning on her, a sunrise of absolute devastation. You spent a decade treating me like I was nothing, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. All while you were living in a world propped up by the very man you despised. His money funded your brother's business. His companies held your debt. Your entire life was a charity case funded by Arthur Devereux, and now by me. He gestured around the room at the yellow tags, at the defeated bailiffs, at the wreckage of their lives. This isn't a curse. This isn't bad luck. This is a reckoning. This is the bill for 10 years of cruelty and arrogance. It's all been called in, and you, my dear family, are bankrupt. Clara let out a raw, animal sob and crumpled to the floor, not in a faint this time, but in a heap of true, soul-crushing despair. Margaret was screaming incoherent strings of insults and pleas. David simply stood there, a broken man, staring into the abyss that had just opened up beneath him. Liam watched them for a moment, the architects of their own destruction. He felt no triumph, he felt no joy, he just felt quiet. The scales were balanced, the debt was paid. He turned to the head bailiff who had been watching the entire exchange with a mixture of awe and professionalism. Proceed, Liam said simply. Then, without a backward glance, he walked out of the house, out of their lives, and into the clean, quiet air of his own. The aftermath was swift and total. David was arrested 2 days later. The evidence from the audit was irrefutable. Faced with a mountain of charges, he accepted a plea deal and was sentenced to 7 years in a federal prison for wire fraud and conspiracy. His empire was liquidated to pay a fraction of his debts. Margaret and Clara were left with nothing. The mansion was sold at auction, the cars, the jewelry, the designer clothes, all seized and sold. They were ostracized from the social circles that had once been their entire world. Margaret, broken and bitter, was forced to move into a small government-subsidized apartment for seniors, a fate she had always considered worse than death. Clara tried one last time to salvage the situation. She filed for divorce, her lawyer attempting to lay claim to half of Liam's $91 billion fortune. It was a futile gesture. Mr. Thompson, with grim efficiency, produced the prenuptial agreement Clara herself had insisted upon a decade earlier. It was an ironclad document designed to protect her family assets from a low-income spouse. It entitled Liam to nothing of hers. And, as Mr. Thompson dryly pointed out in court, it entitled her to nothing of his. The judge threw her case out in minutes. Liam saw her one last time, months later. He was driving through a less affluent part of the city when he saw her. She was working as a hostess at a mid-range chain restaurant, her face tired and stripped of its expensive makeup, her designer dress replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting uniform. She looked up as a car passed, and for a second their eyes met. He saw a flash of recognition, followed by a wave of shame and hatred. Then she turned away, a ghost of a life she had thrown away. Liam did not indulge in the trappings of his new wealth. He sold the cold, modern house he had shared with Clara. He moved into his father's small home, leaving it exactly as it was, a museum of a life well lived. He didn't buy a fleet of sports cars or a private jet. His one concession to his fortune was the quiet security it provided. His true work began with the Aurelian Global Assets. He established the Arthur Devereux Foundation, endowing it with billions of dollars. Its mission was simple: to support craftsmanship, to fund vocational schools, and to provide scholarships for artisans, mechanics, and technicians, the very people his former family had looked down upon. He wanted to honor the quiet dignity of working with one's hands. He kept his father's watch shop. He didn't need the money, but he needed the work. He found a profound peace in the intricate, patient labor. The tiny gears and springs were a world of logic and order, a balm for his soul. He spent his days there, fixing old clocks and watches, often for free, finding purpose in restoring what was broken. It was there that he met Sarah. She was a curator for the city's historical museum, the same one his father had bequeathed his tool collection to. She came to the shop to talk about creating an exhibit centered on his father's work. She was not dazzling like Clara had been. She was warm, intelligent, with kind eyes that held a genuine curiosity. She wasn't interested in his bank account. She was interested in the story of the man who fixed watches. She saw the value in the craft, in the history. She saw him. Their conversation started with watches, but soon drifted to books, to art, to life. He found himself talking more than he had in a decade, sharing thoughts and feelings he had long kept locked away. With her there was no judgment, only a quiet, respectful understanding. One afternoon, months later, he was working at his father's bench, a complex 19th-century pocket watch disassembled before him. The bell on the shop door chimed, and Sarah walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I thought the master craftsman might need some fuel," she said, her smile gentle. He looked up, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he smiled back, a genuine, unburdened smile. He took the coffee, their fingers brushing. It was a simple touch, but it felt more real than his entire 10-year marriage. They sat in the quiet shop, the rhythmic ticking of a dozen clocks filling the silence. He was a man who had been handed the world, but he had found his happiness in a place no bigger than a small room, filled with the ghosts of a good man and the promise of a quiet future. True wealth, he had learned, was not measured in dollars or in the envy of others. It wasn't about the size of your house or the name on your suit. True wealth was integrity. It was purpose. It was the quiet satisfaction of a job well done and the warmth of a shared, respectful silence. His father had known that all along. He had built an empire of money, but he had lived an empire of character. The cruel, noisy world of Clara and her family had crumbled to dust, a monument to its own emptiness. But in the quiet, ticking heart of his father's shop, Liam's world was just beginning to be built, gear by careful gear. And he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his soul that this time it would be built to last.